One of the things I've said to you on the channel in the past is that it's really important for you to discern the offering of those servants in the Bible, of the prophets, of the witnesses, the apostles, and Jesus, I mean, above all, that it's incredibly important for us to lean into the offering that they've provided in order to understand what's expected of us, and also for us to learn from their offering. If we don't learn from their offering, if God is providing something to you through somebody else in order to learn a lesson, the lesson's going to be learned. And so if you decide, well, I don't really want to lean into that, I don't want to even consider it, then what's going to happen is that you will have missed the gently flowing waters of Shiloah, and he's going to have to bring on you the mighty floodwaters of the Euphrates, as he says in Isaiah. What's going to happen is that the lesson will be learned, whether you like it or not, but it's going to be learned in a more difficult way because you rejected the more gentle way. I don't really understand why, but this has been a very difficult thing for people when we used to assemble with many people, or not many people, but with more people. This was a concept that I tried to explain, and people just could not get it. They could not understand the importance and requirement of leaning into the offerings of those God sends. But this is something that my family does, and it's something that I ask them to do. And so my children and I have been having a discussion today about something that I asked them to discern. Why is it that God has me living the way that I'm living? Because if you're not discerning it, there's a problem. There's a problem because what he has me living out right now is pretty weird. It's weird for me, and I'm receiving it from him. It's got to be weird for you, I would think. I'm living in I was a very wealthy woman at one time. Instead of him telling me, which is what I asked him up front, should I sell the building? Should I sell my house and go and buy something outright and go in a remote area? Like, these are the things that I wanted to do, okay? But he didn't allow me to do that. He made me stay where he set me up. And in fact, even before any of these questions were a question, I was still working in the discipline that I was working in. When he first called me to himself, he said to me, I set you up in this place. I placed you on this mountain. I literally live on a mountain in a little mountain town. I placed you here. And months after that, he told me when my tenant moved out of one of the units on my property, there are 2 units on my property, and he said that I was to save that one of those units for my family. I didn't even know what that meant. Does that mean my spiritual family? Does that, who's going to be living there? I had no idea what that meant. At the time, my daughter was getting her doctorate. My son was getting his doctorate. They weren't going to move back to mom's house. Now it would make sense, but it didn't make sense back then. And to be very honest, my kids and I hadn't been brought into the relationship that we have now. We had a relationship, but there was some trouble in that relationship because we lived according to the world. So God had to bring us into a place where that would even make sense. So God had me continue to pay with my life savings, with my retirement, everything that I had me paying the mortgage on 2 of these properties. And then he pulled me out of my career. Pulled me out, said this is not of me. The 3 businesses that I had built slowly pulled me out, saying this is not of me. What's it going to be? I've proven myself to you. What's it going to be? Okay, it's going to go. And then the next thing, and then the next thing, until there was nothing, no money anymore. But it had me essentially waste all of the money that I had made into paying the mortgage and the property taxes and the home insurance and the commercial insurance, paying this on these 2 properties, representing my house and his house, and still taking care of both of those properties, which, to be quite frank, has been a huge burden for me to have to take care of both of these properties. But he has taught me through that commercial building, that house, how to take care of his house. Then there came a point where there was no more money, and I was going, and I reasonably needed to sell the building in order to pay for my house. But God said to me, I am not done with that building. Understand the symbolism. Okay, so what this means is that you are telling me you want me to put my own house. You want me to put my own house up in order to save your house, and you've given me no money. All of the money is gone. You've given me no money to do that. I want you guys to think for a minute how much money I would have had to save, how much money I could have made an important or smart investment decision, and how difficult it must have been for me along the way to stay with God, to keep asking him, are you sure this is the right decision, and to watch that money go away. How much money would you have to have in order to pay 2 mortgages? One on a residential property and one on a commercial property. That's a lot of money. So I'm not an idiot. The reason I got there is because I did make intelligent decisions. And you may ask, well, why would God have me making such a foolish decision? Well, I'll tell you why. Because he says that it's hard for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven. Not just a rich man, but a rich woman too. That it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to get into the kingdom of heaven. So God didn't just say, well, I'm going to let you keep your wealth and just have you make smart decisions. No, in order to purify, make spotless, and refine, and bring me through this process, he had me making stupid decisions, decisions that I would never have made, but standing in the faith that of what God told me to do, and then continuing to go to him every time I felt scared and saw the money dwindling, that I would go to him and work my heart into, okay, if this is what you're telling me to do, then that's it, and not being connected to that money, and putting him first, and reasoning that he's God and he's able to do whatever it is. You know, if he tells me to do this, then all that matters is that I'm obeying, that I'm in obedience to him. And that if I disobey him, I'm not going to keep that money anyway. That's what it means to fear God. Like, you just do whatever he tells you to do, and you work your feelings through it. It's not like you separate from your feelings and just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You're working your heart into trusting him along the way. That's what I've been doing. I've known that these decisions are not sound. And yet, I'm not going to put what I know in the world, or even by my own understanding, above God's understanding and above what he's telling me to do. What he told me to do was essentially to put up my house for his. And I didn't understand that at that time necessarily, but that's what I did. Okay, there's no more money coming in. But you can do anything. You're God, and this is what you're telling me to do. I've taken it up with you many, many times. There is no more money to pay for either of these properties. I'm going to trust. I'm going to believe in what you've said. And I did it for many months without being able to pay utilities, without being able to pay mortgage, without being able to pay anything. Even to the extent that my home went into foreclosure and was auctioned and now belongs to someone else. Somebody else owns it. Even to the extent that the commercial building is now in foreclosure. All of these things progressing, and yet I've had to continue to stand in what God has told me. And you better believe that I continue to go back to him on a daily basis. Are you sure this is what you've told me? You have every ability to correct me. You do so in every other thing. But this is what I've understood from you. You've told me to stay in this land. Now, recently I told you that God told me, you saved your house by putting your house up for mine. All this time, I've been going to this building that he told me, you got to get rid of everyone. You get rid of the groundskeeper, you get rid of all of the employees, you get rid of everyone. Because no one is circumcised in heart, and no one is going to be in this house who is not circumcised in heart, who is not a true Christian. Okay, so not going to make money on the building. That wasn't what I understood when I first bought it. I thought that was going to be the place where I was running my businesses. You told me to get rid of my businesses because they weren't of you. You told me to get rid of these people because they weren't of you. You told me that you will keep that place empty if that's what you choose to do, and that you are the one that protects that place. It doesn't need a groundskeeper who is not circumcised in heart and is a fake Christian. Okay, well then, that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to keep going over there and cleaning up the property and watering the plants and doing all of this stuff. And that's what I did for years. And more recently, what he said to me is, you saved your house by putting it up for mine. And then about a week later, he said, you are going over to the building for the last time, and you will abandon it because I am getting ready to abandon my house. And I shared with you that it was more difficult for me to abandon the building, not because it's an idol, not because of anything. I haven't gotten anything from that building. Nothing. I've put everything into it. I have not received anything as far as making money off of it or anything like that. In fact, I've put everything into it, just like this channel, just like you all. But I put a lot of love into that building. I spared no expense. I took better care of that building than I did my own home, as far as fixtures and, things like that. Remodeled it more beautifully than I did my own home. And now God's telling me to abandon it. And it hurt me, and just, I grieved and grieved and grieved over the building. And I shared with you last week, or the week, what was it, a couple weeks ago now that it's been, that it was very interesting that God used that building with me, because you see in scripture that he feels this anger and this wrath towards his people, but he also feels grief, and he also feels compassion and all of this other stuff. You also see that Ezekiel, when Ezekiel's raised to be a watchman, that he goes in the anger and bitterness of his spirit to go speak to the people, because the people reject everything that he says. And God tells him, they're not going to listen to you because they don't listen to me. But you're to speak these things that I tell you to speak. And so Ezekiel's angry about it, and he feels bitter about it. And that's how I feel. I've gotten to that point. There was a poet. I've felt a lot of different feelings about doing this ministry, about being on this channel and speaking the things that I speak to you guys, when no one listens, no one responds, no one assembles, no one does any of this stuff. But see, God has spoken to me the same way that he spoke to Ezekiel. They're not going to listen to you because they don't listen to me. And so most of what I feel at this point has been anger and bitterness. Not grief anymore. I mean, there's a grief to it, and certainly anger and bitterness are part of grief. And oddly enough, I still feel a longing. Like, I still feel like when I read things like in Isaiah, that your children are going to come to you and you're going to say, who bore me these? I was barren and exiled. Who bore me these? Where did they come from? Or when it says in Revelation, when John is looking at the multitude in white robes and he's saying, who are these? Or the elder is actually asking him, who are these? And you discover that these are the multitudes that came out of the great tribulation. So I know that some of you are going to make it, and that you're going to be brought in through the offering that God has had me poured out to provide. But right now, most of the time I feel angry and bitter and grieved about what it is that people are doing, that they don't respond. And that my offering seems to be in vain, just as it also says in Isaiah, Lord, who has believed our message? To whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? And I've obviously taken these things up with God, because he's continued to lead me to those scriptures, and that's how I make sense of what it is that I've been experiencing. But God did something through that building, because I cried for days over the building. I cried for days, and even now, I'm still thinking when I'm out and about, okay, when do I need to go to the building and go clean up and, this and that, and I wonder how's the building doing? Does it need, how's the weather been? Do I need to go water more this week? Stuff like that. I've always been thinking about maintaining it and taking care of it and caring for it. Just as I've done with you, just as I've done with this channel. Today, God was talking with me about this teaching of a woman's role in his church, and telling me, there have been more people on the channel more recently. They need to hear this teaching again. This is all I think about. All I think about is what I'm doing to serve him, and what you guys might need, and what might I need to teach you before I leave in 2.5 months. This is all I think about. And God has directed my heart. He's molded my heart into that. So I still feel this grief. I still feel this longing. I still wonder, so what are you going to do with that building? But I'm not allowed to go there. I was told to abandon it. And it's a pain in my heart. And he was making me feel that grief, so that I could feel the grief that he feels for you. And he was leading me to scriptures like in Hosea, how he says, how can I give you up? How can I give you up, Israel? Or in Isaiah, how he talks about, how he's, oh, is it Isaiah? I think it might be in the Gospels, actually. How he's longed to gather you like chicks. I think it's in Matthew. Like a hen gathers her chicks, but you were not willing. And he says, look, your house is left to you desolate. You know what desolate is? Deserted. Empty. Another word for abandoned. So he's had me living all of this out in part as a sign, in part in order to build something in me to have a salient, emotional, connected experience so that I can teach you. And with my house, it's been a different thing. With my house, he has said, you are to stay in this land. This is where I set you up. This is where you are to stay. And he's used things like the book of Joshua. He's used the, where the people were afraid to, like, well, not just the book of Joshua, but I think that's what Exodus as well, where they're afraid to enter the land. They're afraid to stay there. They're afraid of the people who are a threat to them. Where they're entering the land in the book of Joshua, and they take over all of these lands. In the book of Jeremiah 42, where he tells the people after Babylon has laid siege to Jerusalem, you're to stay in this land. Don't be afraid of the king of Babylon, who you're now afraid of. I'm going to make a way for you to stay in this land, but if you're determined to go back to Egypt, which they were, they didn't listen to what Jeremiah said. They asked Jeremiah to pray and ask God what they should do. And Jeremiah gave them the answer. You're to stay in this land, and don't be afraid of the king of Babylon, and trust that God is going to keep you here. But if you're determined to go to Egypt, where you say, like, we'll go get our bread, we don't have to deal with war, I will hunt you down. I'm going to bring sword, famine, wild beast, and plague on you. And that's exactly what he did. That's exactly what they did, and that's exactly what he did. So he's brought me into this understanding. Now, I just want to stop for a minute and ask you, like, is this unheard of in Scripture that God would do these things? Did God not have Ezekiel's wife? He took Ezekiel's wife. He said, with one blow, I'm going to take away the delight of your eyes, and you're not going to grieve. You're not going to put on the clothing of mourners. You're not going to eat the food of mourners. You're going to go into exile. You're going to be a sign to the people of what's going to happen to them. And that's what Ezekiel did. And then he told them, when they asked in wisdom and at least some sort of understanding, they said, why are you acting this way? Won't you tell us what these things have to do with us? None of you asked this. Why? Why don't you ask this? Because you don't read the word. Because you don't have understanding that this is what God does, that he uses signs through his prophets, in his prophets, of what it is that he's doing. And so Ezekiel did exactly what he was told. His wife died. He did not wear the clothing of mourners. He did not eat the food of mourners. He dug a hole in the wall. He escaped. He took his belongings with him. And then when the people asked him, why are you doing this? What does this have to do with us? Because they knew that the Lord was doing something. He told them, you are going to go into exile. And you're not going to mourn. Not even for the children that you leave behind. Why wouldn't they mourn? They're not going to have the time to mourn. They're not going to have the space to mourn. When you go into captivity, you just got to survive. Or what about Jeremiah? What about when God was going to God through Nebuchadnezzar was going to lay siege to Jerusalem, actually was already laying siege to Jerusalem, and was telling Jeremiah, this is what's happening right now. Now go buy this field. Go buy this field. Because as kin, you have a right to go buy this field. And so he did. But he said to God, you're telling me that Babylon is laying siege to Jerusalem, and yet you're telling me to go buy this field. And how did God respond? God said, in this land will again be bought here. I'm God. I'm able to do anything. Land will again be bought here. He used it as a sign in the weirdest of circumstances. And so when God told me to keep that building, even though it meant that the very thing that would have been able to, by the world standards, save my house, quote unquote, he was now telling me, you're not going to do that. You're not going to sell the building in order to save your house. And then what was the language that he used with me months down the road, almost a year down the road? The very opposite. I'm just realizing it right now. It's kind of blowing me away. That he said, you saved your house by putting your house up for mine. Not the other way around. Not what the world would have told me to do, which was to put his house up for my house. Because isn't that what the counterfeit Christian pastors do? They put his house up in order for theirs to grow. They tear the hooves off his people and eat their flesh, strip them down. Well, it turns out that staying in the land is really hard. It's extremely difficult. And it's so crazy because I myself have been guilty of this, of reading that God gave this promised land to the people and everything else. So why did the people always want to leave the land then? Why did they always want to leave it? Because they were being harassed and stalked and threatened. And it turned out it was hard to be God's people. But God throughout Scripture keeps telling them, stay in the land. And I'm going to tell you right now, it is really hard to stay in the land, no matter what. Constant threats, constant stalking. I mean, according to the world, all of this stuff is constantly happening. But he requires us to stand confidently in the faith of whatever he has told us to do. We have to do it. And also, I'll have you know that in order to do that, you want to make sure that you've actually heard this from God. Like, that you're not a crazy person. And so you ask for the witnesses. You ask him to show you in his word and by his spirit that this is actually what he's told you to do. And you don't go looking for it. You wait and listen to where he's leading you so that you know that it's coming from him. So what I mean when I say you don't go looking for it is you don't go looking for... Go to ChatGPT or Google and say, what scriptures have to do with such and such so that you can form your own narrative. You don't do that. You sit and listen to God and the ways that he's speaking, and he's going to prove it to you in ways that you couldn't have made up, that you couldn't have formed that narrative. Now, the whole thing is very difficult because every time, there are things that I have to go through, like when I leave my house. Is someone going to be here? Is someone going to be sitting outside of my house? Is something going to be posted to my door? Are there going to be more notices and more threats and more blah, blah, blah? And am I safe to bring my grandchild here? I have to sort through all of these things constantly. Is my water going to be turned off? My power going to be turned off? Every time the fears come up, I have to sort through them, and I have to get to a place with God, not just pull myself up by my bootstraps and make myself believe some narrative I want to believe. Because frankly, I'm going to be real honest. There are many times where I think I would like to just leave. I would like to leave. I would like to just go be with my kids, my family, for the 2.5 months that I have remaining. And where I'm grieving and calling out to God and going, why am I not with my family? I want to be with my family. Why have you not brought my family here? Didn't you tell me to save that unit for them? So I'm constantly taking all of these things up with God. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you're not receiving from God, when it gets to this point where he's telling you to do things that don't make sense or whatever, you're not going to be able to stand. You won't. Because you won't. What are you going to remind yourself of? The things that you've convinced yourself of? That you are telling yourself? Or the things that he has told you? If he has not told you these things, how will you be able to stand in them? These are not even things that I want to do. You understand? They're not even the things I want to do. This is what I'm being required to do, and I'm going to tell you why. Because for years and years of my life, I was too afraid to trust God. And so I am having to work out this judgment of not having believed that he could and would for so many years of my life. I'm having to work this out. And one of the things that he told me from the very beginning, a couple years ago, was you are not to be afraid of man. You are not to be afraid of the devil, and you are not to trust man. And that has carried me through constantly. I've had to keep going back to that instruction. Keep going back. Even as I'm getting notices right now that say, like, your home was auctioned, it was sold for this price, and this is the money that's due to you. I already know that I'm not going to cash in on that money in the next 3 months. It's going to be taken by the banks who intend to do that anyway. And so God has told me, reminded me, don't trust man. All right, so as I've been going through this, it's not just me going through, it's my kids too. They have to discern, has mom gone crazy? They have their own faith. They have their own relationship with God, and God has proven to them that this is true. So it's not really a question as to necessarily like, has mom gone crazy? I mean, that should be a question. I brought it up to them, and I'm sure they've had to sort this through with God, but they have their own testimony. And so when I bring this up to them, or on days that are really difficult, where I'm telling them, like, I just feel nuts, I feel crazy, they've said things like, look, if you're crazy, then we're crazy, because we have our own testimony of what God has done with us and what he's testified to. But one of the things that they do have to discern is, why is God dragging me through so much? Why is he dragging me through this? And so this is one of the questions that we've been discussing today. And my son sent me a scripture this morning. He talked to me a little bit about some of the things that God has been bringing him through in order to understand things. And he sent me Romans 13, 3-7. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear from the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you'll be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. This is also why you pay your taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. Okay, so he's sorting through this. He's sorting through this in terms of some of the things that God is doing with him in his own life, his own situation, and also trying to understand, why do you keep putting Carrie Ann through all of this? Now, when I first read this, I felt a little discouraged, because I've taken it up with God so many times. Like, I'm familiar with this scripture, and I've taken it up with God so many times, and so I found myself this morning going, like, yeah, so why? So why do you have me living in a house that technically I'm not the rightful owner right now? I'm not able to pay for utilities. I'm not able to pay for anything. All right, let's take this within context, because Paul was not allowed to be preaching the things that he was preaching. Do you remember that he was being held and flogged in Rome, where he was a Roman citizen, and not for no reason? Abraham staying in a land where he was a foreigner. The Israelites going and seizing land. And prior to the Israelites going into that land, God said to them, you're going to take over this land, not on account of your own righteousness, but because of the wickedness of these nations. And they were required to believe that God was capable of making them successful to take over that land. And because the older generation did not believe, the older generation who, by the way, saw him part the Red Sea, saw the plagues that he brought on the Egyptians, saw what he did during Passover. So why was he so upset with that older generation? Because they saw everything that he did. He proved his name to them. And they didn't believe that he could, bring them into the promised land? They were afraid. And so they died, and it was their children who actually entered that land. Okay, so my daughter actually responded, because we were actually having this message through text. So I'll go ahead and read her message, because she's had to reconcile these things as well, and these different examples of what's going on with God's servants. It never made sense to me why Paul, who was going against the authorities by continuing to preach, would say to obey the authorities. The way I've understood it is that we aren't to be defiant or rebellious. I don't know what the Romans were doing, but if you consider all of Scripture, his prophets couldn't and shouldn't always follow the rules, because God needed to come first. This passage might help to bring perspective of how blind submission causes you to bow down to an idol. I know in this case, it was an actual idol, but there's obviously greater meaning behind it. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, Your Majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. That's Daniel 3:10 through 12 and 16 through 18. She goes on to say, Jesus also broke the rules of picking grain on the Sabbath, healing on the Sabbath, preaching against the Pharisees. And then she cites Acts 5:27 through 29. The apostles were brought in and made to appear before the Sanhedrin to be questioned by the high priest. We gave you strict orders not to teach in his name, he said. Yet you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching and are determined to make us guilty of this man's blood. Peter and the other apostles replied, we must obey God rather than human beings. So she says, ultimately, the only way we can know what to do is by submitting to him, because the authorities don't always align with him, even though they should. She says, I know you know this, but it might help to have it all written out in one place while you're journaling. With regard to the house, my mom does not want to leave because of what God has told her, not because of her attachment to it. She doesn't want to go against him by not trusting what he has told her to do, which is stay in the land. If this is all true, then the notices to leave the land are tests, which scripture says are sent to refine us and test our faith. So now, I've been here almost a year without being able to afford utilities and things like that, and yet all of my utilities are on. He has continued to take care of me. He has continued to bear fruit through my fruit trees, my garden. He has continued to do all of the things that he's promised to do in taking care of me. And we're living in such a time right now where nothing else would be taking care of me. He had to have set me up here. He had to have provided a place in advance and done all of the things that he has said. I didn't realize that when he first called me to himself. I didn't realize the times we're living in, or the level of wickedness, or the fact that no one else is going to provide my needs to serve him. And also, I would have thought that he would have had me, using the wealth that he gave me in order to make certain decisions, and then he would just, conform everything from there. But see, this isn't what God was pleased to do. He wanted to basically remove that wealth and show me that he could take care of me without anything. And that's what he's been doing. And, there are times where I feel like, my gosh, I'm like a criminal. I'm a squatter in my own home. How has this become my life? How am I doing this? This does not seem right. But then God shows me like the wickedness here in the city I live in. For example, I pay over two times more for water than the city over to me. Why is that? I went to the park the other day. I haven't really had any reason to go to a park. I went to the park the other day with my little grandson here in town, and it was filthy, disgusting. I didn't even put him down. I held on to him the whole time he was holding on to me, and I looked around and I was like, I don't even want him to touch anything. It is so disgusting. I live in a wealthy area, and the park was filthy, sick, like pigs. And and I felt so grieved about it, because I promised him that I would take him to the park when we got back to Mama and Papa's house, because I couldn't have him touching all that. It was just so nasty. So you mean to tell me all the taxes that I've been paying all these years, the doubled up water bill that I've been paying, that they're going to come over here and tell me that they're going to shut off my water? Okay, well, you can only do what God allows you to do. But all this time, I've paid into all of this, and this is how the city is being taken care of. The school down the street from me, you guys can't hire a gardener to take care of things. We have parents coming in and maintaining the grounds. What happens is these cities get built up, and they get built up in wealth, and then you have these corrupt people who come in and take over the city, and they continue to charge more, but they don't actually funnel the funds into what those funds are supposed to be taken care of. My neighbor across the street, before she died, was in a wheelchair, contacted the city to take care of the sidewalk where a tree is growing and has buckled up the sidewalk, and they wouldn't do it. Right in front of her house, they would not repair the sidewalk. Where are the funds going? So now that said, it doesn't mean that we repay evil with evil, but this is what God is showing me. on account of the evil nations. It's not on account of my righteousness that God made this plan for me ahead of time. It is on account of the evil and wicked nations that he is doing this. And all of this belongs to him. So if he wants to tell me, this is what you are to do, and I will continue to take care of you, and he wants to bring judgment on them in order to take care of me, then that is what he's doing. It's not me doing that to them, because to the very last penny, I closed out my bank account with $55 last year. Okay? So to the very last penny, I paid everything that I could possibly pay, and continued to push to obey what God has told me to do, even with $55 to my name. The only thing that matters is that you're in contact with God and what he's saying, what he's telling you to do. And he will give you witnesses in the scriptures. But we have to read the scriptures contextually and correctly. And we have to lean in to the examples that have been given to us through the offerings of Jesus and the apostles and the prophets and the witnesses who are living this out now. The last scripture that my daughter cited was 1 Peter 1, 6-7. In all this, you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Why is he doing this? To prove the genuineness of your faith, which is of greater worth than anything. At least anything that's here in this world, it's of greater worth than gold. And I want to remind you of something else. That God is the one who provides for his house. And this is what he's been pleased to do. And it's not been comfortable for me. It's a lot more comfortable to just give someone the money and have them leave me alone, quite frankly. I did my part, you do yours, like we don't ever have to even interact. But see, God is testing me in every way. He's tested me with regard to my dogs. I told you I don't vaccinate my dogs. I'm not going to vaccinate my dogs because this is what God has told me. That in Exodus 15:26, he is the Lord who heals us. I don't go put poisons into my body, and I'm not going to put them into my dog's body. And in order for me to register in this greedy town, I have to put a vaccination into my dogs, which I'm not going to do because this is my agreement with God. And so am I going to be afraid of the code enforcement officer who keeps coming to my door and putting violations on my door and everything else? No, I'm not going to be afraid of him. I'm going to believe in the agreement that I've made with God, and I'm going to keep going back to the conversations I've had with him because I have indeed had conversations with him. But see, if I'm convincing myself of a narrative, I'm not going to be able to stand in an actual faith of having related with him and having him teach me what he requires. So I want to go back to what the scripture that my son sent me. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear from the one in authority? Then do what is right and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your own good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. For rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. Now, up until that point, what do you understand of that? That those who do right don't have a reason to fear those who bear the sword. Because while we are supposed to be in submission and we are supposed to be in obedience, we have to put God first. And so if we are in obedience to him, and what he wants is for us to respond to these people, that's what he's going to lead us to do. But there are situations in which we are not to respond to them, aren't there? In which we are not to succumb and surrender to what they're telling us to do. And God is the one who will defend. He is the one who will protect. He is the one who will conform. He is the one who's going to do all of these things. What happens is that people who are not living this out, and I'm not saying this about my son because I know that my son is living this out, but he may be learning right now what this actually means and how it's applied in different situations. My son 100% is living this out. I watch him do it, and I hear it in his testimony week after week after week. So there are different situations. But the majority of the time, what I hear are people misquoting scripture because they're not living this out. They're not receiving from God. They're making up their own rules. And a lot of times what they want to do is justify themselves and their own disobedience to God in favor of what's easier, which is obedience to man. I thought this might be a little important to kind of flesh out with you guys, because I know that the things that I talk about that I'm doing right now are hard to understand. To be very honest, they're hard for me to understand. And so it was helpful for me to sit and really, talk through where God has brought me and what he's had me doing. It's very, very difficult. But I want you to know that the things I'm telling you are true. This is true. That God is going to put you in situations that are going to be difficult. And a lot of times we think that the right way is the easy way, and that's not true. In fact, it can't be further from the truth. What are you going to do at the time when Christians are not allowed to buy or sell? You're not going to have the ease of being able to buy or sell or do certain things according to the ways that have been established in the world, because the ways that have been established in the world are evil. So what are you going to do at that point? How are you going to pay your taxes? How are you going to pay your mortgage? How are you going to pay for your groceries and everything else? You're going to have to go to God, aren't you? And he's going to have to conform something for you that may not be comfortable and may not seem quote unquote right. And it's going to be uncomfortable for you not to be paying these things, because you're going to feel like, well, doesn't God say this and doesn't he say that? But what about you being in that position? And so, it is of value for me to be in this position right now so that I can say that to you, because I won't be able to say it to you when you're going through it. I won't be here, thank God. But you are going to be in a position where God has conformed certain things for you, and you're going to be required to stand in what he's conformed for you, even though you're being harassed and stalked and threatened, etc. But if you know that God has given that to you and you continue to take that up with him, you'll be able to stand. But if you make things up on your own, you will not. We in America have not been put in these positions yet. We have been very, very privileged to not be put in positions where we have had to extend beyond our little comfort zone of we do this and they do that and blah, blah, blah. In other countries, that's not the case. But I'm telling you right now that a time is coming where you're going to have to receive from God instead of your own understanding. So please discern this message with him.